my colleagues at the Libertarian Institute. Today I have Connor Freeman. He's one of the assistant editors at the Institute, and of course, my co host on the show, Conflicts of Interest. So, Connor, a lot tons I want to talk to you about today, but I did narrow it down to four subjects so we don't go on for hours and hours and hours. War with Iran is the big one. That's what's getting all the headlines, so I want to go there. On your thoughts, is Trump Israel first or America first? Taking the West Bank and some of your recent coverage on Israel, and of course, a horrifying poll that the audience will find out about at the end of the show. So, Connor, let's start off here with this article from our colleague at antiwar.com, Dave DeCamp. It is headline, U.S. anticipating potential Israeli attack on Iran. And Connor, we have these reports coming out that this is going to be against the wishes of the United States of America. And so, how concerned are you that Tel Aviv, over Washington's objection, is about to launch a war against Iran?
Well, very concerned. And thanks for having me on, Kyle. I'm very concerned about this story. It broke in the Washington Post last night, and basically what they were saying was that the U.S. has been concerned for months about an impending Israeli strike on Iranian nuclear facilities, and so much so that at this point they're evacuating non-essential personnel from the American embassy in Iraq as well, and doing likewise in Bahrain and Kuwait. And they're sending home or authorizing the return of any dependents of American military personnel across CENTCOM's areas of operations throughout the Middle East. Now, based on what I've read since that story broke, it looks like, and according to ex-officials who are speaking to the media, that this is the kind of thing that the Americans would only do if they really felt that Israel was about to go kinetic and strike Iran. So that's immediately cause for concern. We do know that there are going to be a continuation. There's going to be a sixth round of direct talks between Steve Witkoff, Trump's envoy for the Iran negotiations that have been ongoing since April. And he'll be meeting with Abbas Araghchi, the Iranian foreign minister in Oman, whose Muscat is mediating these talks. And currently, of course, the talks are at an impasse because the U.S. is sticking with this no enrichment policy, which Iran sees as, of course, a non-starter and would be a national humiliation. And the Ayatollah Khamenei has said that this could only happen over his dead body or if he resigns. And it seems like it's something that's being promoted by the Israel lobby and by the neoconservatives and their allies throughout the blob to destroy or thwart any diplomacy between the U.S. and Iran, which is nothing new. Usually under Biden, the Israelis relied on clandestine attacks, sabotage attacks on Iran's nuclear program or, naval assets, oil tankers, cargo ships, and that sort of thing, and a myriad of assassinations that were carried out, particularly in 2022. And Netanyahu, there's been constant reporting over the last few months, especially, there's that piece in the New York Times last month about how Netanyahu is prepared to strike Iran's nuclear facilities if it looks like the U.S. and Iran are moving toward a deal that is not to his liking. And so once again, we have this rogue genocidal apartheid state which is a pariah internationally, and the U.S. is inevitably headed on that same course if we don't change things fast and part ways with Tel Aviv. But it seems like there's no will to control the Israelis, let alone to stop their genocidal campaign in Gaza. And since we've crossed that bridge, there's currently a battle in the American right wing where you have the restrainers on the one hand led by people like Tucker Carlson, and you have the war hawks led by people like Mark Levin and Rupert Murdoch. There's this great piece in Politico that's up at antiwar.com right now about all the insider information. They interview a bunch of anonymous officials about it. And we're seeing like a civil war being fought on the American right. Unfortunately, Donald Trump is in a position where he's making threats that he will feel compelled to follow through on, namely assisting Israel in bombing Iran, according to CBS News, with either refueling, mid-air refueling, or intelligence support, or both. And the Iranians are in a position now where the defense minister announced yesterday or the day before, that they are going to have to attack with their ballistic missiles all, U.S. bases in the region within reach of their missiles. So, I mean, Iran may be saying that to try and coax some concessions out of the Americans, and Washington may be relying on Israel as the bad cop to try and get Iran to make concessions, although that seems much more difficult since this non-enrichment policy is impossible for Iran to agree to. There is a
Yeah.
caveat with the consortium deal, but it remains to be seen if Witkoff has the guts to really see that through, because it's gonna be politically impossible, because there's no support from the other side of the aisle, the Democrats, to make a deal with Iran, from what I can see, which is really disappointing. I mean, their leaders like Chuck Schumer is calling him, Trump chickens out on everything. He cannot make a deal with Iran, and they're goading him into basically following through on Netanyahu's threats.
Really important points you made there, Connor. Trump is going to have an uphill battle in the Senate, and the Senate is lined up against him. We played a clip on last episode of the show. Alistair Crook was on Judge Napolitano's show, Judging Freeman, explaining how 80% of the Senate is against Trump, not only on Russia, but also on Iran. I heard Colonel McGregor today kind of made the point that if you look at the Senate right now, the composition of Congress, and you ask where their loyalty is, probably more of them are going to say Israel than than Trump, right? Not the United States, but Donald Trump. And I wonder if this is even true among Republicans. I really am worried that that could be the case, that Netanyahu almost has more influence in the U.S. Capitol than Donald Trump does. But, I really want to kind of move on here and ask you about the lingering question, which is the nuclear issue. And this is the thing that could push the war between the U.S. and Iran to end up happening, or at least the fake excuse that Israel is going to use to attack Iran. So I want to start off here by playing this clip of Lindsey Graham and Pete Hegseth talking in a Senate committee hearing.
So I'm trying to get everybody to think, let's don't do what we did in the 30s. They're going to use a nuclear weapon if they get it. Are they trying to build a nuclear weapon versus a peaceful nuclear power program, Mr. Secretary? Have the Iranians been trying to build a nuke?
There are plenty of indications that they have been moving their way towards something that would look a lot like a nuclear weapon.
So, I mean, Connor, we've heard from the administration. Me and you, we've read the work of Gareth Porter, who has for decades documented that Iran is not building a nuclear weapon. But even the U.S. intelligence community admits that they're not. And yet we're hearing this rhetoric even out of the administration. And again, this isn't Marco Rubio. This isn't Mike Waltz. This is Pete Hegseth, who's supposed to be at least marginally better on these issues, who seems to be repeating Israeli propaganda points in the Senate.
Yeah, I mean, also, Hegseth has an obligation to look after the safety of his troops, and playing rhetorical games like this, he clearly said that so that people like Mark Levin, or who Tom Cotton was that put out the tweet, who said Pete Hegseth just said that Iran, is pursuing nuclear weapons, and that's not what he said. But he was deliberately vague and playing these little games. Oh, it looks very much like a bomb, so that someone could say that, even though, as you said, this contradicts the Nuclear Posture Review of 2022, the National Defense Strategy of 2022. This contradicts the Office of the Director of National Intelligence Threat Assessment from March of this year under Tulsi Gabbard. The CIA under William Burns, repeated several times throughout the Biden administration himself personally, especially at times when Israel was, provoking Iran and attempting to prevent any level of even indirect diplomacy in Vienna. We covered that throughout the whole process, which ultimately amounted to nothing because of the deference to Israel on the on the part of the Genocide Joe administration. But Burns would come out and say, "Hey, Iran's not building a nuclear weapon. There's no evidence of that." And unfortunately, I think Tulsi said that to the Select Committee on Intelligence, Senate Committee on Intelligence. Great.
The IC continues to assess that Iran is not building a nuclear weapon, and Supreme Leader Khamenei has not authorized the nuclear weapons program that he suspended in 2003.
So, Connor, how infuriating is it that you have this member of the administration, the director of national intelligence, admitting, right? This isn't a mission, this isn't a propaganda point. They are admitting that the propaganda that they have been spewing, that Netanyahu has been spewing for 2 decades, that Iran is on the cusp of building a nuclear weapon. Not only is that not true, but Iran isn't even trying to build a nuclear weapon. And yet, as you say, you have the U.S. Defense Secretary going there and telling Lindsey Graham in a clip that's obviously meant for Fox News, for CNN, for the mainstream media to just eat it up and say, oh, the defense secretary is saying that Iran is building a nuke. How frustrating is it that this is what's going on here?
It's maddening, and it reminds me of Condoleezza Rice saying we don't want the smoking gun to be a mushroom cloud. I mean, that's exactly what he's doing. They know it's a lie. Actually, I don't know if Hegseth knows it. Let's just assume he does. I mean, I'm sorry. There's a lot of incompetence in this administration, where sometimes you don't know if people are stupid or malevolent, but at this point, it doesn't really matter. Donald Trump promised his base that he would prevent World War III. This is not the way to do that. He's going along with Israel committing the Holocaust of our time. And now, really, I mean, this is like a game of chicken he's playing with Iran. And Netanyahu and the Israelis are the only party here that want a war, notwithstanding the network of neoconservatives and pundits and ex-military officials and talking heads and think tankers that also support war with Iran here in the blob. But the American people don't want this. In fact, 50% of Republicans between 18 years old and 50 have a negative view of Israel. They do not like this relationship. So they already must feel like they're getting stabbed in the back by the Trump administration. Starting a war with Iran would be the stupidest thing that Donald Trump could do, because that base could actually turn around and do something about it. I mean, we're talking about, in the 20 years or so of the terror wars, 20 plus years, we have spent something like $8 trillion or $9 trillion, plus probably double that in interest over time. And 4.5 million people have been killed directly or indirectly. But war with Iran would dwarf the consequences of all of those illegal wars that we've been fighting all these years. And the American people have no stomach for this. There is a contingent of apparently Republicans that are over the age of 50, baby boomers and the older generation, that still, they watch Fox News and they're terrified of any, especially Iran. We've been geared up to hate and fear them since the revolution. And we are constantly told that they're building a nuclear bomb, even though it's completely false. And in the meantime, the American people are, we're being immiserated, and there's lawlessness in the streets, and the government is acting totally unconstitutionally on every level. And there is a lot. I mean, Donald Trump's approval rating is very low, especially after his first 100 days in office. And I don't know what he's thinking. Maybe they think a war would actually help that and boost support for the administration, but that will almost certainly backfire, and the war will be a total disaster. And the worst part of it is that Netanyahu, according to the New York Times, officials close to Netanyahu believe that if he attacks Iran, the United States will be forced to come to their defense. And so this is a trap. This is a trap, and they're taking us to war. We're probably going to know more about this after Sunday or after Monday, once we hear what the fallout from the talks in Oman are. But
if they even happen.
Exactly.
And Connor, we do have this clip of Lindsey Graham, the ultimate war hawk, that I really do want to play for you.
Is Putin going to stop in Ukraine?
I don't believe he is, sir. I think he'll
What do you
go
think?
until.
What do you think, Secretary? Is he going to stop?
Remains to be seen, Senator.
Well, he says he's not. I mean, this is the 30s all over. It doesn't remain to be seen. He tells everybody around what he wants to do. Are you familiar with his military buildup in terms of armaments? It's well beyond what we need to do to take Ukraine. Listen, I like what you're doing. I just think we got to get this stuff right. Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon because they'll use it. They're homicidal maniacs who are religious Nazis. China is an expansionist power who will take Taiwan if we don't deter them. Russia will dismember Ukraine and keep going if we don't stop them.
So, Connor, it's so almost comical, right? That to Lindsey Graham, everything's the 30s, right? And pretty soon he's going to have to clarify the 1930s because we're going to be a whole century past this point in time that he's constantly referring to. But it's always the 30s that, Putin, the Ayatollah, Xi, Kim Jong-un, they're always Hitler. They're always about to replicate the Holocaust. And if we don't go to war, if we don't spend endless amounts of money on our military, if we're not prepared to fight Russia, China, North Korea, Cuba, Venezuela, Iran, all at the same time, then we're just so weak and so incompetent that it's capitulation. And so, final thoughts before we move on here, Connor.
Yeah, so I mean, is the U.S. going to stop at Ukraine? Because it looks like they're moving on to Taiwan after that. And also, are we going to stop at Gaza? Because it looks like we're moving to the West Bank after that. Are we going to stop at Yemen? Because it looks like we're moving to Iran now. So, this is all just projection, just like what the Israelis do. Every accusation is an admission. And, quite frankly, if we're going to talk about the 1930s or the 1940s, as I said earlier, the Holocaust of our time, uh, essentially led and cheerleaded by the Lindsey Grahams in our midst, is ongoing, and the American people are subsidizing 70% of every dollar or shekel spent on this genocide. 70%. We've sent 90,000 tons of weapons and other military equipment to Israel. This is all on the backs of the American working class, and it's opening us up to further attacks from terrorist groups because, once again, as we're seeing here with Iran and what the Israelis are doing in Gaza by backing ISIS-affiliated groups of looters and criminal murderers who are wreaking havoc in Gaza on top of everything else the IDF is doing, and what we've done in Syria, where now Al-Qaeda or Hayat Tahrir al-Sham rules Damascus. Every aspect of this multi-front war for Israel benefits primarily the Likud party, these radical settlers who are killing people to steal their land in mass, and Al-Qaeda and ISIS. And if we go to war with Iran, the American people can look forward to a probably endless run of terrorist attacks here at home. And we're already seeing more terrorist attacks in the United States since Trump came into office. It's blown up out of proportion because the mainstream media treats any Israeli life or Jewish life to be worth, I suppose, 100,000 Palestinian lives or something. But we are seeing more terrorist attacks, and this is, again, we're only empowering Al-Qaeda. I mean, even our war against Yemen, there's been talk about backing Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula further if we escalate that war, which I'm sure will take place if we go to war with Iran. And once again, we're knocking out the axis of resistance. They've already decimated Hezbollah, and we're attacking all of Al-Qaeda and ISIS's fiercest enemies throughout the region. And this is what Israel wants. And this is what both parties in the United States want. They're very happy with Jelani. What did Donald Trump say? He's a great-looking guy with a strong past. This was a deputy under Baghdadi of ISIS. This is a man who brags about killing American troops in Iraq, and he was sworn loyal to Ayman al-Zawahiri, as Scott Horton calls him, the butcher of New York City, guys who brought the towers down. That's who these people are. So Donald Trump is, not only best friends with the real Hitler of our day, Benjamin Netanyahu, but he's also buddying up with Al-Qaeda. And this policy, again, as I said, it's only going to make we're going to have more blowback because, once again, we're using Al-Qaeda against our ostensible enemies, the Shiites, and we're not buying them off, or any other terrorist group that might want to carry out attacks in the United States or elsewhere in the West, because we're still exterminating the Palestinians in front of the whole world for the Israeli settler movement. So those are my final thoughts. And Lindsey Graham, he just recently threatened, he was trying to boast Israel should bomb the Gaza Freedom Flotilla that Greta Thunberg, the Swedish activist, was on. That was just that the members of that are just now being deported. But he was saying, I hope they can swim. And he's calling for murder of a 22-year-old autistic girl for having empathy for the poor Palestinians. And that's what they're doing. They're criminalizing empathy for people because they're threatened by it. And that's why they say that even saying free Palestine is anti-Semitic.
Yeah, so Connor, I want to move on, and I think our next subject is going to be a really good one. Just want to remind people to take the time to share this episode of the show, get it out there to a few more people. And the way you can really help us is by going over to the YouTube channel and subscribing to the show there. We're getting some comments, which is always great to have during the live show. I really appreciate it. We get great feedback on this show, and because so many people are watching live, subscribing to the YouTube channel, we're able to grow the show like this bonus episode that we have here today. So, Connor, I want to ask you next about the MAGA movement and Donald Trump. And is it Israel first or America first? And there's this clip of Steve Witkoff giving a speech where I think he really cements that the answer might be that Trump is truly Israel first.
He's such a special man. He's an incredible friend to the Jewish people. No disrespect to Prime Minister Netanyahu, who I actually spoke to today. I think the President, Trump, could be the first sitting president who could also be the Prime Minister of Israel at the same time.
So, Connor, I mean, of course, like, people flatter Trump. That's the way that you keep your job in the Trump administration. But this idea that Donald Trump could truly be the prime minister of Israel, what do you make of that?
Well, I mean, Mark Levin was appointed for some, I don't know how obscure it is, but some sort of position in the Department of Homeland Security, I think a month and a half ago. And he came out and gave some speech where he called Donald Trump the first Jewish president of the United States. These people are crazy. I don't know what if they, he's speaking here to basically in Israel. It's these are the same, I believe it's the same sort of aid humanitarian organization that created a bunch of the atrocity propaganda after October 7th, including the hoax about Hamas putting an Israeli baby in an oven and this sort of thing. And that's who he's talked to. Miriam Adelson was there. Lutnick was there. So he's basically saying that, Donald Trump could be the prime minister of Israel. Well, that's directly saying that he's subordinating American interests to a foreign government. And Israel and the United States have we don't share any national security interests with Israel. In fact, I've heard even from certain, fellow travelers of ours in the libertarian movement who think like, we shouldn't be supporting their genocide in Gaza. However, we should, help like use our air defenses and scramble jets to shoot down ballistic missiles and drones if Iran tries to attack Israel. But it's this exact policy that emboldens Israel to start wars that we're inevitably forced to fight. And we've already spent trillions of dollars, I mean, on these wars, Israel, like Iraq, for instance, which was led by the Israeli fifth column, the neoconservatives. Like the war would not have happened without their influence on the George W. Bush administration and in the mass media. And so we've already impoverished ourselves, and we have the blood of millions of people on our hands already. And so for him to say that, I guess this is how these people talk to each other. Now, how the MAGA movement feels about that themselves, because how many of those people are there? I mean, the people that are there are Israel first. The MAGA movement itself is in this weird predicament because on the one hand, as we said earlier, between the under 50 Republicans, are about 50%, they're divided 50-50. The under 50 demo is against our relationship with Israel. They have a negative opinion of Tel Aviv. And so they don't like any of this, presumably. But there is, the propaganda behind Trump being a peace president or the guy who didn't start any new wars and this kind of these slogans that we hear, which is what all they amount to. It has kind of warped the minds, unfortunately, of conservatives who assume that whatever happens, happens. But if it happens, it's because, unfortunately, circumstances have forced themselves. We've had circumstances forced upon us, not through any flaws on Trump's part, but just because he tried to make a deal. But of course, Iran didn't want to make a deal. Witkoff is trying to make a deal with the Russians, but the Russians don't want they don't want to negotiate. And same deal with Hamas. Witkoff has not really succeeded here unless you want to give him credit for ending the American illegal war on Yemen temporarily. But even the reason that was commenced in the first place was because he failed in Gaza. I mean, everything they touch turns to, fire and bombs and murder. And so, yes, they are Israel first. I hope the MAGA movement wakes up, because this is only going to hurt them. And we're already seeing, as they're preparing to roll out this new massive database and the Total Information Awareness project with Palantir, and overtly partnering with them to increase the Orwellian state we live under, or make it even worse. The American people should realize they're the target here. We are the target. They're coming after dissidents. They don't like libertarians. They may have used us here in this past election to help grease the skids for Trump's reelection, but they're betraying us on every level, and they're betraying the conservatives that actually like what Tucker Carlson says about no more wars, about America first. There needs to be a revolt on the part of the MAGA movement, because right now all of their hopes and dreams for them and their kids are being sacrificed at the altar of greater Israel. And so, yes, there needs to be a huge rebellion here soon, because Donald Trump needs to know that there are going to be major consequences if he does this. And unfortunately, this is what happens when presidents get reelected for a second term.
Yeah. I will say, Connor, one of the things that makes me mildly optimistic, and Kelly Vallejos explained this on the show, and I have noticed it, like when you go on Twitter now and you look at Mark Levin or one of these Republican hots arguing for war with Iran, they're very critical of the U.S. special relationship with Israel. And these are some of the most effective communicators and users of the X platform. And so, this does seem to have some sway on the Trump administration. But before we wrap up here today, Connor, I did want to ask you about the situation in the West Bank. But I think this poll from Haaretz is really just so incredibly important and telling. And so I wrote this article for the Libertarian Institute yesterday. 64% of Israelis say there are no innocent people in Gaza. And what that article from Haaretz explains is that 64% of Israeli adults agreed with the statement there are no innocent people in Gaza. The survey found a wide opinion between Arab citizens of the Jewish state and those who back the governing coalition. 9 in 10 supporters of Benjamin Netanyahu agree with the no innocent statement, while 92% of Israeli Arabs disagree. And Connor, I think one of the things that's so important to highlight here is when you talk about 64% agreeing, that survey includes Palestinians, the Arab citizens of Gaza. And so if you just looked at the number of, Jewish respondents, are, people who are, I guess, even agnostic, but in Israel because it's the Jewish state, they are overwhelmingly, over 2/3 of them do not believe there are innocent people in Gaza. A war that has had at least 50,000 child casualties, that's, injuries plus stats. They say there are no innocents in that conflict. So, Connor, your thoughts on this story?
Yeah, well, I mean, just look at what they're doing with the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, where they bring in the aid at night, wait for the Palestinians who are starving to death to come running toward these ostensibly their distribution sites, and then the Israeli tanks and snipers open fire on them, and they've already killed well over 200 people and injured thousands more in these basically canned hunts. I mean, the whole thing is a canned hunt, but this is a particularly callous aspect of the Gaza genocide. But I'm not surprised, because in Israel, there's no stigma against being genocidal and wanting to wipe the Palestinian people off the map. We always hear that that's what Iran wants to do to Israel with their supposed nuclear weapons program, which they don't have. But that is exactly what the Israelis want to do to the Palestinians. What's even more troubling to me about this poll is what it says about the American people. Because on the one hand, okay, so 64% of the total Israeli population believes that there are no innocents in Gaza, where more than half the population, or slightly more than half the population, are children. And we have the names from the health ministry, the Palestinian health ministry, of over 16,000 children who have been murdered, including nearly 1,000 babies who never reached their first birthday. But how do the American people feel about this? Do they not think there's any innocence in Gaza? What exactly? Because the people that support this either they, because it's so out in the open. It's not like the war in Yemen where if you had to be like us or one of the Quakers or one of these Arab activist groups who were really paying attention to the story because it was in the back pages of the New York Times at best. This is completely out in the open, being live streamed into everybody's home, and anybody who has an internet connection, they can see it. Well, they just cut the internet today by bombing the last operating fiber optic cable. So God knows what they're going to be doing now, since there's an information blackout, at least temporarily. But the American people know exactly what's going on here. So either they agree with the vast majority of Israeli Jews, or they don't care that there are innocents in Gaza. They just want to support the bombing of another Arab nation into oblivion. And that's exactly what we're doing. And we have basically, I mean, there's a callousness, there's a racism, there's something going on here where the American people have allowed the genocide of a nation of Muslims and Christians that, as I said, is completely funded by the working class of this country, to just be like the air we breathe. It's been going on for nearly 2 years now. And it doesn't matter who's in office, whether it's Genocide Joe or Genocide Donald. We have just come to, accept it on a mass scale. Not us and not the leftist protesters and the Jewish anti-Zionist activist groups and Code Pink and some of the conservative movement, thankfully, and libertarians, but the vast majority of the country, even though they answer correctly on these polls, like I said, there's at least 50% of the Republican constituency that is apparently A-OK with all this. And I wonder really what they think about the people in Gaza. I mean, do they think they're all animals that throw gays off of roofs and cut women's hands off and all this stuff? Because, the picture we've been presented with, especially since 9/11, is that essentially Arabs are barbaric animals, and they're savages, and you have to kill them. You really do see, I still do see people on Twitter advocating for nuking the Middle East. They call it a cancer and they say it requires radiation. And so this is par for the course. But unfortunately, since 9/11, our society has been emulating the Israelis in many ways. I mean, accepting torture and mass surveillance and this policy of, global war. We may as well be like Israel, not have a constitution, because we certainly don't follow it. But this is lawlessness. And there should have been a breaking point a while ago over this. But again, you hear people, even the ones that we like on the right wing, they act like, well, if he goes to war with Iran, then I'm really going to be upset. But in the meantime, we're exterminating and erasing a nation of Muslims and Christians, and we're mass murdering children at a rate not seen in modern warfare, deliberately. And every single bullet, every single bomb has an American flag, or may as well have an American flag on it. So we're creating hatred all over the world against us, and we're going to be a pariah state, just like Israel. We're going to be isolated. All of our feigned legitimacy on the world stage is evaporating, and it's all so that we can help the Israelis exterminate these people. I mean, quite literally exterminate them.
Yeah. Well, Connor, it is, crazy that you have this poll right here that shows an overwhelming number of Israelis support the extermination of the Palestinian people of Gaza. And yet, if you go and ask the average American who teaches their children that the other side should be exterminated, they're going to be, Hamas teaches their kids to hate the Jews. Just like if you ask the average American, does Israel have nuclear weapons that they're going to use to wipe out Iran, or does Iran have nuclear weapons they're going to use to wipe out Israel? They're going to say Iran has the nukes, when of course the inverse is true. There's just so much Hezbollah. And Connor, there's so much more I'd like to talk to you about on today's show, but we got to wrap it up there. Thank you so much for coming on the show today. Everybody, that is Connor Freeman. He's the assistant editor at the Libertarian Institute. He also does some writing at antiwar.com and several other independent outlets. He's my co-host on Conflicts of Interest and just one of the most knowledgeable people on U.S. foreign policy. So thanks for coming on the show today, Connor, and we'll definitely have you back on in the future.
Thank you so much, Kyle.